Hi, I'm Larry Yoder. This is my wife Amanda, and we are the co-executive directors of Pure Gift of God. Thanks for reaching out to us, and that must mean that you're interested in adoption in some capacity, and we're here to maybe answer a few questions that you might have.
Yeah, thank you for reaching out, and we look forward to connecting with you more and being able to walk alongside you on your adoption journey. So first of all, if someone feels led to adopt and they feel like, yes, this is the right time for me to move forward, what would you say their first step is?
I would say the first step would be to really consider what type of adoption that you're interested in. So there's a few different options out there. One of them would be going through a newborn domestic infant adoption. That would mean you would be adopting a baby from the United States. The other option would be to do an international adoption, and that would be adopting a child from another country. And typically a child from another country would be a little bit older, not necessarily a newborn, just because of the time that it takes to adopt and all the factors in that. The other option would be to adopt a waiting child, which would mean that the child was in foster care and the parents' rights terminated. And oftentimes, children in that scenario are a little bit older. There's a good possibility that there might be a sibling set or something like that involved. Those are kind of the three options that you need to decide which one's best for you. And I always like to encourage families to go into it with an open mind and look at all those options before really making a decision of like, yes, this is the only thing we're open to. Just to consider all the options, because there are a lot of children. I think in Ohio alone, I think there's like 3,600 children that with their parents' rights terminated and they're open for adoption. And that's a large number of waiting children.
Right. So there is a greater need for children who are older or who maybe are part of a sibling set.
Yes.
Yeah. That's worth considering. And I also would say really dig in and do your own research as much as possible. Just find out what these different types of adoption entail. And then also I would say like really start working on looking at yourself and even preparing yourself to be as healthy as you can possibly be emotionally, and really looking at learning about trauma and learning about attachment, because this is all going to play in.
Yeah.
So yeah.
The more of that type of work you can do on the front end, the better off you'll be. Because really the best way to serve the child in your home is by being your best self and being a healthy person.
Yeah, that is so true. So then the next question that we often get is, how do I find and choose an agency? On our website, we do have a list of recommended agencies, but there are so many out there, and we can't guarantee your experience either way. But we know that there are a lot of great agencies that are working to connect children with waiting families. And so there are just a few things that you want to be aware of, like make sure that you find an agency that you feel comfortable with, because you're going to be working closely together throughout the process. And then don't be afraid to ask questions. Like there's no such thing as a stupid question, right?
Yes.
So like ask all the questions and find out, how many children they may place per year. Find out about their fee schedule and about some of those, like their cost involved. Ask about birth mother counseling and if they offer that, and whether or not they provide facilitation between bio families and adoptive families for the first year or however long. Just asking about what kind of trainings they provide and making sure you get in on that, because training is so important on the front end.
Yeah.
And then also, I just wanted to say that we do not typically recommend consultants, just because it's not always necessary, and we just see the fees being very high, and sometimes there's some unethical practices there, and so we typically don't recommend consultants. But yeah, just asking the questions and going in with an open mind and finding an agency that you can really connect with is so important. So then from there, what comes next?
Yeah, so once you choose an agency, the next step would be to complete your home study. So a home study, it's a process, and it looks scary right at first, but really if you just continue to work at it, then you can get through it. Because luckily, Amanda, when we did our home studies, she was a champ with that. It can look overwhelming. So you get a stack of paperwork to work through. And part of the home study is you have to go get your fingerprints done. You have to have a doctor's visit where you're getting a checkup. You have your home inspection where they come into your home and make sure everything is safe. When we had our home study done, when they did the walkthrough visit, we were cleaning out every drawer and
we were so nervous.
We went overboard. Yeah. And, they walked in and they looked around, poked their head in the door. They weren't looking through our drawers. They're not trying to find a reason to fail you. They want to make sure your home is safe. Is basically what it comes down to. And yes, you do want to clean your house, but you don't have to go excessive. A lot of questions we get sometimes is about guns. Like, hey, I'm a hunter, I have guns, I have a gun for self-protection. Most agencies require you to have your guns locked away and your ammo locked away in a different location. So yes, it is totally okay to have guns as long as they're locked away appropriately. Another part of the home study process is going through your story. So what we had to do, in different agencies might be a little bit different, but we had to write out our story, our life story, and then we did an interview, each of us separately with our caseworker, and we talked about basically our life. That can look a little bit intimidating sometimes, but again, we had a great caseworker, and it was an enjoyable process for us in that regard.
Yeah, I would say there's also a fire inspection and some reference letters you would have to get, a few things like that. But yeah, I would say just taking it one step at a time. Try not to get overwhelmed by everything it entails and just go step by step and you'll find your way working through it pretty quickly.
Maybe the average would be 6 months to do a home study. Some people do it faster, some people take longer. I think for our first one, we took almost a year because of some other things that were going on. But yeah, so it could be, I would say, an average of 6 months to complete a home study. By the time you do your background check, wait for that stuff to come back. And then typically every 2 years, you have to update your home study. So if you don't get placed within those 2 years, you have to update the things that are expiring. Your agency will help you with all of that stuff.
Great. So once your home study is approved, then you'll move on to the matching portion. And it really depends on what type of adoption you're pursuing, what that looks like. You may need to create a profile book or create something that would be shown to birth mothers if you're doing domestic infant, or there may be some other considerations going on while you're matched with a child internationally, or even through the foster care system. So that can look different depending on the agency. Okay, so we did want to talk also a little bit about openness in adoption, because this is a question that we get asked a lot. First, I should say what I mean when I say openness. I'm talking about the communication that happens between the biological family and the adoptive family. So whether that is phone calls or letters and photos or visits that you might do, times of getting together and connecting in person. That's an ongoing process. And so how important is it to be open?
I would say extremely important. And I know that times have changed, and I believe nowadays it's hard to find an agency that doesn't highly recommend it or even require it at times. And obviously, there's always a choice there on the birth mother side. So you can go into adoption saying, hey, we want to have an open adoption. But if birth mother says that she doesn't, then she will be the deciding factor on that. One of the main reasons that the agencies are requiring open adoptions is because of the research that's been done in favor of open adoptions, because of how it helps the child, and it's in the best interest of the child in the long run.
So there have been a lot of studies about this, and I think they've just shown that for the well-being of the child and for even their development of identity and adjustment, and even as they grow older, feeling that sense of knowing who they are, and just that having that openness and that connection with their biological family is so valuable.
Yeah. A child, for the most part, is always going to wonder and have those questions of where did I come from? And when you don't have those questions answered, you tend to create something, your own story in your mind of what that was like. And sometimes that story is better than the reality. Sometimes it's worse. But either way, those questions, it's so important to have those questions answered for your child. My experience, so I grew up and I didn't have a relationship. I didn't know who my biological father was. I met him for the first time when I was 30 years old. So growing up, I always had those questions. I think sometimes it's scary for the adoptive family. It's vulnerable for them more so than anyone. But I think it's important to keep the best interest of our child in mind. And, even if it's uncomfortable for us, I think a few of the biggest fears are like where the birth mom decides she wants to take the child back, Well, the reality is that's not possible. After finalization happens, there's not a chance in the world. Like once finalization happens, that child is legally yours, just like a biological child. And the other thing is like, well, what if that child grows up and would rather be with their biological family than me? What I would say to that is if you're creating a safe place in your home and you're the safe parent, you can't control the future. And there's very few adopted children that don't get angry at times or upset and make comments like, oh, I'd just rather go be with why can't I just be with my biological family? Or, that is a common phrase that a child will throw out there. But if you create a safe home, a place where they feel like they belong, it doesn't matter if they say that, you are still their parents and you are still a place where they feel the safest. And a lot of times when they do say that, they have this ideal situation in their mind of like, oh man, it would be this dream, like my biological family is perfect and you are not. And so I'd rather go be with them. and the other thing is, it's okay for them to have those feelings. Like it's okay for them to express those feelings of like, hey, there is a loss. Mm-hmm. Because in the perfect world, they would be with their biological family. But unfortunately, we live in a broken world, and that's not always possible. So it's okay for them to have those feelings. But I think you as a parent, you get to walk through that with them. And yeah.
Yeah, I would say too, that it's a privilege to walk with our child through these things. And if we don't help them navigate that, then they have to try to navigate that on their own. And I think that's a lot more detrimental to them. And so just being able to help them navigate that connection with their birth family, I think it is a big privilege. Even though it can be hard at times and uncomfortable at times, I think it is so worth it for them. And there's a connection there that is just always going to be there. And their biological parent will always be part of them. And so just honoring that. Mm-hmm. And I think also as we get to know their biological family, we may find that we have a lot in common and we may just have more empathy and more understanding of their situation.
Maybe they're in the low point of their life and they're struggling with addiction or whatever it is, but to really be careful with how you speak and even think about biological family, because your child will pick up on that. And even if bio family is struggling, it doesn't mean they're always going to be struggling. And just because they don't have connection and relationship now doesn't mean that they won't in the future. And so to really just guard your heart and your words, pray for them. When you pray for someone, that releases grace in your heart and even changes your attitude about someone. I wouldn't want to be judged in the worst point of my life. I don't think anybody would. A child will quickly pick up on how you feel and what your attitude is towards biological family. Ideally, at some point, there is a place for reunification, connection, and relationship between adopted child and bio family. And I'm not saying to sugarcoat things. I think it's important that children understand their story and understand, even more than what we typically think. I think it's healthy for them to understand even the reasons that they were adopted
right, and
at an age-appropriate way.
Yeah, and I would say too, if your child comes from the foster care system and has experienced abuse, like physical, sexual abuse, that would be a different scenario. And you would want to have those protections in place, and not have that connection. But yeah, wherever possible, to make that a priority.
Again, it comes back to what's in the best interest of the child. So if a child's going into it scared because they have been abused or whatever, that's very different. Ideally, just really walking through that with your child with a open communication, and whatever answers you don't provide for that child will go and seek it out themselves because they want to know. Something else that I wanted to touch on with open adoption is just the fact that when you do an open adoption, your agency more than likely will be that middle person between you and bio family until you're both comfortable to share each other's information. So it's not like if you sign up for open adoption that all of a sudden everyone's going to have all your information and know where you live and all these things. There's in our scenario, our agency did a really good job with coordinating those visits and being the ones that set that up and did the communication between us and BioMom. And it didn't take long before we exchanged information then and reached out on our own and made those connections. It is that safety net. If, I know that sometimes this could be stressful, like that unknown of like an open adoption. That's a lot of times some of the questions that come up.
Yeah, I know I was surprised by how quickly we did feel comfortable with our child's birth mom and were able to share that information. And so, every situation is different.
And there's times where you might even be in the room when BioMom's giving birth and have those connections beforehand. So, every situation is a little bit different.
Okay, so now we want to kind of just continue on the conversation and talk about some of the unknowns in adoption. So, what are some of those unknowns, and how can we manage that throughout the process?
Yeah, some of the unknowns are same as if you're having a biological child. So some of those unknowns are, will they be healthy? Are there going to be complications? With adoption and foster care, there are, this is not always the case, but I would say a high percentage of cases where there is some kind of drug abuse, alcohol abuse, physical abuse, and things like that. So there's a high chance that if you're going through the newborn, the domestic infant adoption program, that the child will have some sort of exposures to drugs or alcohol. Not always, but there's a high chance. And just because there's exposures in the womb doesn't mean that the child can't grow up living a normal life. But that's not always the case either. There's that risk. But again, when you have a biological child, there's also risks of complications and medical things and all of those. So I always encourage families to go into that part, because that's something that you'll have to decide in your home study of what we're open to, what exposures we're open to. Are we open to exposures to marijuana, to smoking, to drinking, and how many drinks, and drugs, and all of the things. And so you have to go through and mark down what you're open to. So I would say do some of your own research, but I would say go into it with an open mind and a willingness to kind of learn and understand that there's risks no matter if you're having a biological child or adopted.
Right. And your agency will fill you in more on what those risks are. And you'll have to just spend time considering that and praying about that. But also just wanted to say, no matter what, we know that this child is just intrinsically so worthy and just so valuable. So but you'll have to decide and just do some research on that too.
One more thing I would say with that is, I think a big misconception with adoption is that if you adopt a newborn baby straight from the hospital, that there's not going to be any trauma. We would say, and research has shown this, that it doesn't matter if a child's adopted as a newborn or through the foster care system at 8 years old, there's always going to be trauma. When a mother's carrying a child, and just that decision to place her child for adoption is a stressful thing that the baby feels. And then that immediate separation at birth is another trauma. And then if you add any kind of exposures, that's more trauma.
Right, and medical trauma.
Medical trauma, NICU stays, all of those things are trauma. Every child is going to react to their trauma in a different way.
Mm-hmm. All right, so what about the financial part? How much does an average adoption cost? And are there any supports or helps for people who may need some assistance with the financial part?
So that's a great question. I would say that a domestic infant adoption, you can expect in the $30,000 to $40,000 range for domestic infant adoption. International adoption would be probably more like $40,000 to $50,000. We've seen them less than that, and we've also seen them more, but I would say it's pretty average.
Mm-hmm. I think too with international, you have to think about the time, the travel costs, and then also that time spent away from home, and so that's another consideration.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then if you're adopting a waiting child out of foster care, then I would say the average cost of that would be probably in that $15,000 range or less. And if you're a foster family adopting a child that's placed in your home and then the parents' rights get terminated, those costs are significantly less, and basically just the court costs, which would be like $1,500 or so. So there's a big difference in those. Yeah. And yes, there are lots of organizations out there similar to Pure Gift of God that give grants to families that are adopting. A lot of times that financial part in the beginning is like that big hurdle. Looks like this huge mountain, but there is hope. There are organizations like Pure Gift of God who give grants. There's Show Hope, there's Lifesong, there's multiple other ones that I can't think of right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would just say too, we were surprised over and over again by the way that God provided for us and for our family when we were walking through this process. And so I would encourage families not to let that financial piece scare you or be the reason that you don't pursue adoption if that's in your heart, because we know that God is there to walk alongside us and to provide.
We hear testimonies all the time, and have experienced this ourselves, where funds would be due, and they would reach out and be like, "Hey, these funds came through just in time, just when we needed them. Funds were available for us." The whole heart of Pure Gift starting was, we as Pure Gift of God don't ever want finances to be something that holds someone back from adoption, and so that was part of the key reason that Pure Gift of God even started.
Right.
And so, yeah, I would encourage you to just believe and go for it.
Yeah. So if someone wants to get more involved with Pure Gift of God, could you share a little bit about what we have available for that?
Yeah, sure. So with Pure Gift, our goal is not just to help on the financial side, but also help on the backside of adoption, because we realize that adoption is a lifelong journey. And so we provide therapy services for families and children impacted by adoption and foster care. So that looks like some individual therapy, that looks like some group therapy stuff. We have a program called Halo, where we take families through a 10-week intensive program, and we found that to be extremely helpful. What Halo does is it doesn't just work with the child, but it works with the child and the family, and so we found that to be really helpful, to really help the parents understand how to help their child in their home. And then we also offer support groups and things like that, just places for families to connect with other families who are on a similar journey. So.
Yeah, and we do have trainings as well at different times throughout the year, and some community events as well. So our fall festival every year in September, It's always so fun to see families come together and just really enjoy some time connecting and time on the farm and some fall activities. So
we use TBRI, and we have a few TBRI practitioners on our staff. One of them is Amanda, the other one is Rose and Cheryl. And so if you're looking for good material to get started to understand some of those things around trauma, then anything you can pick up around TBRI would be helpful. And we do have some resources on our website. So if you go on our website, under resources, you'll find helpful websites, you'll find podcasts that we recommend, books that we recommend, and things like that.
All right, so any final thoughts? Just wanted to remind you that this whole process that you're in, while it looks big and there are a lot of pieces, it's really still just that first step of a lifelong journey with bringing a child into your family. And so I would encourage you to find supportive people to get in your corner and find community and others who are maybe walking along a similar path. Reach out and connect. We would love to connect with you.
I would say too, something that was really helpful for me personally was podcasts. So I remember, listening to podcasts and hearing stories from other adoptive families, adult adoptees, hearing their stories and learning from them has been so helpful and insightful. Just to learn more. And, a lot of times we go in with this idea of what we think adoption is like. It's healthy to kind of keep an open mind and be teachable and learn, especially when it comes to trauma. A lot of times when someone will ask, like, what's the first step, or what's one thing you'd highly recommend in the adoption process, and we always want to encourage people to work on yourself. The more that you can really work on yourself, the better you will be as a parent.
Yeah, 100%. All right, well, thank you so much for reaching out, and we hope that this conversation was helpful for you. If you still have questions or if you'd like to connect more, please feel free to give us a call or reach out to our email at info@puregiftofgod.org, and we look forward to connecting with you more. We're praying for your family as you walk this journey.